Thank you all for being here. My name is Tyler Menzies, and I'm going to be talking about video games and how they relate to surgical performance. So the question you might be asking is why? Why video games and why surgery? Well, to answer the first question, it's actually very easy. I love video games. In fact, I might love them a little bit too much based on images like this one, and this one, and these three, and oh, it gets worse, and this one. And yes, that D stands for days. But why surgery? And the answer to that is this. This was actually a study that took place in 2002 and came out in 2007, and was pretty much the first one to report a distinct relationship between surgeons who played video games in their spare time and an increase in surgical performance. It cited that surgeons who played more than 3 hours a week of video games outside of their surgical practice time had 47% fewer errors, performed 39% faster, and performed 41% better in score metrics than individuals who did not. Now this was limited by when it took place and the small participant group, but I decided to conduct a study observing these effects more in depth. And what I did was a meta-analysis. And what a meta-analysis is, for those of you who might not be familiar, is I take a bunch of studies who have observed what I'm looking at, so the relationship between video games and surgery, and I take the data from those studies and I collect all of it and I condense it down into one paper. I use certain statistical analysis programs to get new data that's reporting on the collection of that data. And so my meta-analysis looked at 3 distinct areas pertaining to the relationship between video games and surgical performance. I looked at active gameplay, which was surgeons and surgical trainees, medical students, people like that who played video games in their spare time in addition to their surgical training. I also looked at virtual reality simulation, which is individuals who practiced on surgical simulators, which were designed to emulate the surgical experience and how that pertained to their performance. And then lastly, I looked at historical gameplay, which is individuals who have a history of playing video games, who might have played video games in their adolescence or their childhood, and how that affects their initial performance on laparoscopic simulator tasks. My independent and dependent variables for this is actually mislabeled, so excuse me for that, but my independent variables were individuals who, as I said, played video games as practice for surgery, who used virtual reality simulators, or had a history with video games. And my dependent variable was continuous across all 3 independent variables, and it was observing their performance on surgical simulation tasks. And so my hypothesis in general was that there exists a statistically significant positive relationship between video game play and surgical performance. As I've said up to this point, the collective kind of opinion across all of the research has been that there exists a positive relationship, and they're actually moving forward with research under this assumption, but there has yet to be a paper or data that quantifies this assumption. So I wanted to collect all this information and come to a scientific conclusion that this is indeed the case. These are the results from my experiment as I analyze all of my different studies. These are a bunch of complicated numbers, which probably don't mean a whole lot to you, and that's fine. But to condense everything fairly comprehensively for you, for game training, so for individuals who played video games in their spare time as a way of training or in supplement to their training, we saw a statistically significant moderate effect in the results, meaning that there exists a present relationship between video games and surgical performance. For VR training in situations where surgeons were training on surgical simulations, I saw a large statistically significant effect as a result of that, which is more effect than the game training, which represents some significant difference between virtual simulations and game models. And then for gaming history, we saw a statistically significant small effect, which may be some sort of artifact of data collection or sampling bias, or it might indicate that individuals who played video games in their past did have some sort of cognitive and intellectual changes that caused them to perform differently on initial laparoscopic training. This is a graph visualizing this with 95% confidence intervals. And as you can see, the bars for the middle one, which is VR training, it might be difficult to read in the back, are larger, and that's because the number of studies that I selected pertaining to VR training were smaller, and thus I have less confidence in that reported statistic as compared to things like game training or gaming history. For my conclusions in future research, I conclude that that my preliminary analysis is strongly indicative of some degree of positive effect. So I feel that my research on this matter has done well to quantify the assumptions in the research up to this point, and offers a good kind of foundation for future research in the topic of video games as it pertains to the training of complex tasks, especially surgery. I recommend additional meta-analysis, which would include a number of things like wider study sampling and more extensive data collection. One large limitation of my study was the fact that I had a significant sampling bias based off of what was available to me through my data collection and research. VR gaming is here and ready for research. That's interesting, as some of you might know, that people wear, there's gaming where people wear headsets and can look around and see things, whether that be putting your phone in a cardboard box or buying a $600 piece of equipment in order to do so. And surprisingly, there's very little psychological research actually delving into what this means and what this does to the brain and how this affects the individuals using it. So I think that that's a very lucrative and high potential area of psychological research going forward. And anecdotally, gaming as a warm-up to complex tasks such as surgery or other performative tasks may provide some benefit, whether or not that is linked to the actual video games or whether that's linked to something like the Mozart effect in cognitive arousal, would need to be parsed through future research. But I wanted to add that in there because it's potential that's another domain of potential gaming benefit. Future directions from a more general standpoint, I outlined 3 of them here. I think the expansion of simulation training within medicine and technical fields is a valuable way forward. The current system is good and it's improving fairly quickly, but I think given the research up to this point, it would be very valuable to expand simulation training for surgical trainees especially, because you're dealing with real people whose lives are at risk, and the more that we can practice and the more that we can solidify those skills prior to actual operation, it does a lot for the safety of the individuals involved. Research on the effects of VR gaming and simulation immersion training. As we approach realistic digital environments, there's a lot of psychological research to be done there, as I stated before, so that'll be very interesting. And then lastly, the application of games and game theory to a wider range of learning domains. Current education doesn't take full advantage, I think, of digital technology, video games, and simulations and things like that. So I think if we design and implement digital simulative technology into classroom settings, that we have the potential to revolutionize modern academic education for the benefit of our children. Thank you. Yes.
So you talked about one of the weaknesses of your study was perhaps a sampling bias with available research available to you. Can you give us a sense of how many articles you initially screened, and after all of the processes you went through in screening those, how many studies entered into your meta-analysis?
Yeah, so I started out with 544 articles, which I surveyed across 3 different search databases. And I condensed those down to 21 articles, which gave me enough data to properly analyze their results, totaling somewhere around 34 individual experiments within those studies. So I condensed them down, and there were a significant amount of studies that were left out, either for unusable data that I couldn't use to analyze for what I was looking for the effect size, or studies that were unavailable entirely. So as I said, future meta-analyses should seek to use those studies and kind of gather that data more effectively than I did. Yeah.
Do you recall seeing variability in effects relative to age or previous surgical experience?
I did not, and I think there were a couple of studies that did analyze age, especially with regards to gaming history, but I think a large obstacle for that would be 2 things, primarily that the selection or the study population is fairly limited amongst med students and things like that, and also when it came to the effects of this are generally limited to initial surgical training, not surgical performance mastery, and so that further condenses kind of the population of people that you're dealing with for effective results. Yeah.
Did any of the articles look at the relationship between VR training and gaming history? Because I guess what I'm thinking about is it's probably fairly likely that people who are feel comfortable in virtual reality training and gaming have maybe done that first step and sort of a follow-through effect, if you will.
Yeah, to answer that quickly, because we're out of time. Some of them use gaming history as a moderating variable and looked at that. And VR gaming doesn't necessarily look like I portrayed it. It's a little bit different. It's more just strict computer simulation at this point. But some of them use that as a variable, but I don't have any data off the top of my head on that. No. Thank you.
Practicum as a volunteer firefighter with East County Fire Rescue. Over the past 2 years, I've given 999 hours of my time to East County as a volunteer. I served under Captain James Troutman during my practicum hours. My practicum was supervised here by Dr. Matthew Wise. Coming into Concordia, I knew I wanted to study science. I knew I wanted to study medicine, but I didn't really have a clear direction of where I wanted to go. And I knew firefighters had something to do with medicine. I wasn't super sure what, but I knew they took volunteers, and that was what was important. And so with that in my mind, one day I drove by Station 94, which is within walking distance to my house, and that sign on the front says, "Join the team, be a volunteer." So I thought, okay, let's give it a shot. So I just walked in and asked them, like, "Hey, can I volunteer here?" And gave me an application, and 3 months later, I was in a volunteer firefighter academy. That lasted 3 months. I went every Saturday for about 12 hours. Towards the end of that, I had to enroll in EMT academy, which lasted another 3 months. I went every day. And I also had to become a healthcare level CPR certified. I did all of that while going to school here and playing baseball. I was tired a lot. But I got more training, more opportunities, and more direction than I thought ever possible just because of that sign. Just because on a whim, I kind of just decided to walk in. I had no background in fire science. I never went in cadets. I was just the guy off the street. But firefighting introduced me to the field of emergency medicine, and that has now become the field that I wish to pursue professionally. Emergency medicine's fun. I mean, you don't know what you're going to get, and whatever happens, whatever you go to, you have to deal with it. You have to be the guy that says, all right, this person needs help absolutely now. And you don't get to turn around and question yourself. You just have to deal with it. That's fun to me. As a student athlete, it's hard for me to stay still, as you can tell. And I wanted a job where I have to move around, work with my hands. And I found that in emergency medicine. It's a field that I greatly respect and I greatly put effort into getting better at. When I first started out working for East County, I was kind of a gopher. Go for the med kit, go for the airway, go for my tools. That's about all I did. And my biggest fear at the time was that somebody would ask me for a tool and I'd have no idea what they were talking about. And go give me my Halligan. Or I didn't want to be that guy who was opening every single compartment all the way around the engine looking for this tool. But as my time and as my confidence and knowledge base grew in fire, I began to help patient care on calls. I take vitals on patients, deal with patient assessment. And during my practicum, I was even given the opportunity to take lead on calls. Taking lead is when you're the first guy at the door, says, "Hey, I'm with the fire department, tell me what's going on, tell me what I need to do." And for my captain who's been doing this for so long, to look at the volunteer, the guy who came in off the street and has 2 years of experience, to say, "I trust that you can conduct yourself respectfully, I trust that you can handle a situation, take lead." That was incredibly humbling to me, and I was very lucky to get that opportunity as a volunteer, and that's something that I've taken very seriously. On our shift, we also do a lot of preparation for emergency situations, because our whole job is to make an emergency not an emergency. We do maintenance on every single one of these. This is a fire engine, which goes on 90% of our calls. On the far left is a tender. The entire back of that is filled with 2,500 gallons of water. As a rural fire department, we operate outside of Camas, Washougal, Washington. We don't have fire hydrants all over the place, so this serves as our mobile fire hydrant. And we have a squad which works on wildland firefighting. Every single day, each of these are maintained, tools are checked, and supplies are checked. The biggest duty that I learned as a firefighter is that half of your job and half of what a patient needs is somebody to come into a situation who's completely calm. I've been gathering my skills to be able to talk to a patient who's having breathing problems the same way I'm talking to you right now. Not emergent, not in a hurry. It's just they need somebody who shows up and says, it's okay, I got this under control. And that's something that I've been trying to get better at. I'd like to show you guys my uniform here, just because I want to show off. It's my fire jacket. These are my boots. Super cool and heavy. And my helmet, it says EMT firefighter. On the back it has my name, Gonzales. The point I want to make is that nothing on this uniform says that I'm a volunteer. When I put this on and leave the station, I'm not volunteer firefighter Ryan Gonzales. I'm just a firefighter. There's no difference between an intern, a volunteer, a part-timer, a full-timer. We're just firefighters. And so understanding that responsibility of getting to put that coat on has been something that I've been working to get better at. You know, it's something that I take very seriously because I don't represent me. If I mess up on a call, Ryan Gonzales doesn't look bad. East County Fire Rescue looks bad. The profession of firefighting looks bad. So that's why the seriousness associated with the healthcare field in general, you know, every scrubs, the white coat that a doctor wears, all of that has carrying with it a certain level of respect that you need to uphold. So going forward into the healthcare field, that is something that I will continue to take very seriously. I continue to train and pay attention because it doesn't matter the certifications I have when I'm out in the field. If I don't know what I'm doing, the piece of paper I have at my house doesn't mean anything. So these are just some of the people that I've gotten to work with, the people that I remember to take pictures of. Supervisor Captain James Troutman in the bottom middle, who I was on his shift. These people have taught me more lessons about conducting myself as a professional, showing respect to each other and to patients, and being able to keep composure in an emergency situation. The lessons that I've learned from these people will continue to impact me even though I do not choose to follow fire as a profession right now. I will always be thankful to firefighters and always thankful to the lessons that they have taught me. Thank you. Any questions?
How fast can you turn out?
I won't show you right now, but like 45 seconds. The full-time guys can do it in about 30 seconds. We do a thing called 0 to hero, where you go from street clothes, you have to put on all that, and then also your air pack, mask up, and be on air, turn on the bottle, everything. And those guys can do that in like a minute and 10 seconds. It's crazy. I'm more close to like 2 minutes. Yes.
So what was the hairiest call that you got, or the hairiest situation?
When I was fairly new, I had to run a code call, which means we had to do CPR. And that was nerve-wracking to me just because I was new, never had to see CPR being done. But since then, you know, CPR is more like you just follow steps, it's easier. During my practicum, we got a helicopter emergency, which was weird because a pilot sent out a mayday call, said that his propeller stopped working. And all we had to go on was like longitude, latitude lines, and we just had to go to that area and try to find a helicopter. And it was stressful trying to like just roll around, and we found him on a golf course. But he was okay, but it was stressful trying to go off of, you know, longitude, latitude from a helicopter spinning down. You know, you don't have a whole lot of direction.
Thank you for your work. That was really inspirational to hear what you learned and all of that. I'm really impressed. So you're not going fire. What are you planning to do?
As of right now, I'd like to attend medical school and become an emergency room physician. And I believe that that follows the same intensity where instead of you don't know what you're going to, you don't know what's coming in the door, you still have to deal with them right away. So it's the same aspects of emergency medicine that I'm looking for. And I believe in the power of education, and I want to formally educate myself as much as I can, because the more that I know is the more confidence that I have to work. If I did choose to stay fire, I would still need way, way more training than I have to have the confidence that these guys have. Anything else?